Welcome to Truthful Crime Case, where we explore some of the most disturbing and unexpected murder cases. In this episode, we head to Boynton Beach, Florida. In January 2013, this peaceful town became the scene of a horrifying crime. A 70-year-old woman was found dead after a scandalous affair with her daughter's boyfriend took a tragic turn. Edie Palmer-Delamere lived an unconventional life. Born in Zambia to British parents, she was raised amidst the untamed beauty of Africa. She later moved to London, where she became a model during the vibrant 1960s, a period when the city was buzzing with fashion and culture. Her modeling career introduced her to celebrities, artists, and high society. However, Edie was never one to settle down in one place for long. She married 4 times, with each wedding more lavish than the one before finally settling in Boynton Beach, Florida, a quiet retirement community known for its laid-back vibe and an average age of 62. Edie, a wealthy divorcee, had earned a reputation as a demanding bridezilla. She had an eye for luxury, flaunting her designer clothes, flashy jewelry, and a fondness for Bentleys. Despite her age, Edie was fixated on preserving her youth. She spent a significant amount of money on cosmetic procedures to keep up her appearance and frequently surrounded herself with younger people, especially men with whom she had intimate relationships. Her vanity was no secret in Boynton Beach, where she was often spotted at upscale boutiques and beauty salons around town. Edie had one daughter, Lila Palmer-Delamere, but their relationship was rocky at best. Edie's controlling personality and fixation on her appearance created a barrier between them. Lila had distanced herself for years, choosing to study Zen Buddhism in Japan, far from the influence of her mother. When they reconnected in late 2012, the reunion was far from smooth. Edie, who was preparing for her 5th marriage to a much younger man named Richard Ricklosker, was more absorbed in her wedding plans than in repairing her relationship with Lila. Edie had even referred to her daughter privately as an ugly little piglet in the days leading up to her death. Edie was preoccupied with the extravagant wedding she was planning. Edie spent countless hours at the spa, receiving treatments to make sure she looked flawless for her big day, and browsed high-end stores like Saks Fifth Avenue for the perfect wedding dress. However, beneath the glamorous exterior, her life was far from perfect. Her obsession with youth and the need to control those around her had caused deep fractures in her relationships, cracks that would eventually lead to her untimely murder. On the morning of January 15, 2013, Boynton Beach was basking in the warm glow of the Florida sun, a typical winter day for the peaceful retirement community. But inside the luxurious home of Edie Palmer-Delamere, something was gravely amiss. Around 9:30 a.m., Lila Palmer-Delamere arrived at her mother's house, intending to go over last-minute details for the upcoming wedding. Upon entering the house, Lila was struck by the unsettling silence. There were no tunes from Edie's vintage record collection, no sounds of her moving around. A sense of unease settled in Lila's stomach. Lila called out to her mother but received no answer. Her anxiety mounting, she ascended to Edie's opulent bedroom, decorated with costly furniture and walls showcasing photos from Edie's glamorous past. What she discovered next was truly horrifying. Edie was found lying naked and lifeless in her king-sized bed. Her once beautiful face was now a disturbing sight. She had been shot, and in a horrifying detail, her eyes had been cruelly punctured with a ballpoint pen. The shock overwhelmed Lila. She stood frozen, her eyes locked on the horrifying scene. In a panic, she grabbed her iPhone and dialed 911, her hands shaking as she tried to explain the grisly discovery. "What the hell? My mother is dead. There's blood everywhere." It's disgusting. Lila's voice trembled with fear and disbelief as she described the scene to the emergency operator. The police arrived within minutes, their sirens cutting through the quiet morning. Officers from the Boynton Beach Police Department swiftly entered the home, securing the area and directing Lila to wait outside. Paramedics arrived shortly after, but it was evident that there was nothing they could do. Edie was already deceased. As Lila waited outside, struggling to make sense of the situation, neighbors began to gather, their faces reflecting a mixture of shock and concern as they whispered among themselves. In a community where the biggest news typically involved a neighbor's new Ferrari or a planned all-night party, the discovery of a brutal murder was unfathomable. Lila struggled to come to terms with the horrifying reality of her mother's death, While everyone wondered who could commit such a horrific crime, the Boynton Beach Police Department responded swiftly to Lila Palmer-Delamere's frantic 911 call on the morning of January 15, 2013. Detective Gregor Harbinski, a veteran investigator with over 20 years of experience, led the team. Harbinski, known for his calm demeanor and keen attention to detail, was well suited for this grim case. Upon arriving at Edie Palmer-Delamere's opulent home, the officers were confronted with a scene of unsettling violence. The crime scene was nothing short of a nightmare. Edie's bedroom, once a symbol of luxury, had become the scene of a savage murder. The king-sized bed, draped in satin sheets, was drenched in blood. Edie's lifeless body lay in the center, naked, with a gunshot wound to her chest. What shocked the officers most were Edie's eyes, gruesomely punctured with a ballpoint pen, resembling a cruel parody of a sunny-side-up egg. The sheer brutality of the act indicated a deep-seated rage and suggested that the killer harbored intense hatred toward Edie. Detective Harbinski and his team commenced their investigation with a meticulous examination of the room. They meticulously bagged and tagged evidence, including the blood-stained pen found on the floor near the bed. The crime scene unit took extensive photographs of the room from every angle, documenting the horror in vivid detail. They also dusted for fingerprints, though the task was complicated by the presence of Edie's numerous sexual visitors and household staff over the years. Outside, Lila sat on the curb, wrapped in a blanket from a neighbor, her eyes red from tears. Harbinski knew she needed to be interviewed, but he first focused on ensuring the crime scene was thoroughly processed. As the investigation unfolded, it became apparent that this was not a random act of violence. The brutality of the murder and the mutilation of Edie's eyes indicated that the killer likely knew her personally and harbored a deep grudge. Given the violent nature of the crime, Detective Harbinski reached out to the FBI for help and enlisted Dr. Camilla Kapoor, a renowned criminal profiler and psychologist specializing in violent crimes, to assist in the investigation. After reviewing the crime scene and discussing it with Harbinski, Dr. Kapoor created a psychological profile of the killer. She concluded that the murderer was likely someone close to Edie, perhaps a family member or one of her numerous sexual partners. The profile suggested that the killer was motivated by jealousy, resentment, and a profound desire to exert control over Edie. The act of gouging out Edie's eyes suggested a desire to obliterate her gaze, possibly driven by feelings of inadequacy or a fear of judgment. Dr. Kapoor's profile added a crucial dimension to the investigation, indicating that the perpetrator was not merely a cold-blooded killer, but someone deeply disturbed with a complex and troubled emotional connection to the victim. With this new insight, the police shifted their focus to those closest to Edie, aiming to identify the murderer. They quickly zeroed in on Lila Palmer-Delamere, Edie's estranged daughter. At 34, Lila had spent much of her life overshadowed by her mother's glamorous and demanding presence. After returning from Japan, where she had spent several years studying Zen Buddhism, Lila had hoped to find some peace. However, reconnecting with Edie seemed to reopen old wounds. Their relationship was strained, with Edie frequently criticizing Lila for her appearance and failing to meet her standards. Since coming back to the U.S., Lila had been struggling financially. She lived in a modest apartment in West Palm Beach and worked part-time at a local yoga studio, barely making ends meet. Lila was known for being quiet and reserved, typically keeping to herself. However, beneath her calm demeanor, those close to her sensed a profound sadness and frustration. In the months before her mother's death, friends noticed that Lila appeared increasingly anxious and frequently expressed feelings of being trapped and powerless in her life. The police believed Lila had a strong motive for wanting Edie out of her life. Years of emotional abuse and living in her mother's imposing shadow could have pushed Lila to her breaking point. Additionally, discovering that Edie was having an affair with Lila's much younger boyfriend, Jake DeCastro, would have felt like the ultimate betrayal. The police theorized that Lila might have seen the murder as her only way to break free from Edie's control and humiliation. Detective Gregor Harbinski brought Lila in for questioning just 2 days after the murder. During the interrogation, Lila seemed nervous yet managed to maintain her composure. Lila denied any involvement in her mother's death, claiming she had been home alone chanting sutras at the time of the murder. However, her alibi was weak, with no witnesses to verify her whereabouts. The detectives probed into her relationship with Edie, especially her feelings about the affair with Jake. but Lila remained guarded, refusing to elaborate on their questions. Lila's behavior during the interrogation raised concerns for the investigators. Her detached and almost cold demeanor when discussing her mother's death seemed unusual for someone mourning a parent. However, there was no physical evidence directly connecting Lila to the crime. Despite their suspicions, the police knew they needed more concrete evidence to build a solid case against her. As the investigation progressed, Lila remained a key suspect, but the lack of solid evidence meant that the police had to dig deeper. They hoped that further scrutiny of the crime scene and additional interviews with people connected to Edie would reveal the truth behind the brutal murder. The next step in the investigation led the police to Jake DeCastro, an 18-year-old with a notably complicated life. Jake, an undocumented immigrant from Argentina, had been living in Boynton Beach for several months by January 2013. He took on various odd jobs such as landscaping and dishwashing, barely making ends meet. Despite his challenging circumstances, Jake was known for his charm and good looks, which made him a popular figure among the area's wealthy and often lonely older women. Jake's relationship with Lila Palmer-Delamere, Edie's daughter, was complex. Lila, 16 years older, had taken the vulnerable young Jake in, providing him with a place to stay, some money every now and then, and protection from immigration authorities. In return, Jake offered sex, although he saw the relationship as more transactional than romantic. Jake had modest dreams. He hoped to build a stable life in America and, eventually, save enough to start his own empanada stand by the beach. However, his uncertain immigration status made his future plans risky and unclear. Edie Palmer-Delamere's overt sexual interest in Jake added another layer of complexity to their relationship. Those familiar with them noted that Edie had developed a strong attraction to the young man. Known for her penchant for younger men, Jake was no exception. Edie was said to have showered Jake with gifts, such as Rolex watches and an Armani suit, and suggested a future together if he left her daughter for her. For Jake, this was an enticing offer. Edie's wealth was far greater than Lila's, and a relationship with her could provide opportunities he had only dreamed of, including the chance to one day open his own empanada stand. When the police questioned Jake, he appeared nervous and evasive, frequently avoiding direct answers and steering the conversation away from his relationship with Lila. He did admit to having a sexual relationship with Edie, but insisted it was purely physical and that he had no romantic feelings for her. Jake claimed he was with friends at a local cantina on the night of the murder, but his alibi was weak, with no one able to confirm his whereabouts for the entire evening. The detectives grew wary of Jake's motives, aware that he stood to gain significantly from Edie's death, especially if she had promised him a portion of her considerable wealth. Despite their intense questioning, Jake remained composed, though his discomfort was evident. Jake denied any involvement in the murder, insisting he had no reason to harm Edie. Despite his claims, the police remained skeptical. They suspected that Jake might have been desperate enough to commit the crime in hopes of securing a future that had always seemed beyond his reach. Despite their suspicions, the police found no physical evidence connecting Jake to the murder. There were no fingerprints, DNA, or witnesses placing him at the scene. Although Jake DeCastro remained a person of interest, the investigators realized they needed to explore other leads to find answers. The investigation into Edie Palmer-Delamere's murder also directed the police toward Rick Lasker, Edie's 45-year-old fiancé. Rick, a local businessman, had met Edie at a charity event in late 2012. Their swift romance soon resulted in an engagement, despite their 25-year age difference. Friends and neighbors in Boynton Beach described Rick as charming, but those closer to him noted his quick temper and financial difficulties. Rick was struggling to keep his business afloat, a small chain of used car dealerships across South Florida, which, by January 2013, was losing money. The lingering effects of the recession had left Rick in a difficult financial situation, and he was desperate for a financial break. Meeting Edie, a wealthy widow with substantial savings and a strong attraction to younger men, seemed like a solution to his problems. However, their relationship was far from smooth. Despite planning their wedding, Rick and Edie's relationship was fraught with conflict. Edie's controlling nature often made Rick feel more like an employee or submissive partner rather than an equal. Their frequent arguments were particularly heated over the prenuptial agreement that Edie insisted on. Edie wanted to protect her wealth, while Rick, already deep in debt, saw the prenuptial agreement as a threat to his financial security. Their disputes grew so heated that neighbors reported hearing loud arguments from Edie's home in the days before her death. When the police questioned Rick, he appeared calm but was noticeably guarded. Rick denied any involvement in Edie's murder, insisting that, despite their arguments, he truly loved her. He provided an alibi for the night of the murder, claiming he had been entertaining potential business partners at a strip club in Miami. However, detectives found inconsistencies when they verified his alibi. The meeting Rick mentioned was indeed real, but it ended several hours before Edie was killed, leaving a significant gap in his timeline. The police were particularly focused on Rick's potential motive, as Edie's wealth was a strong incentive, especially given Rick's financial troubles. If Edie had died before the wedding, Rick would gain nothing due to the prenup. However, if he could somehow make her death appear accidental or orchestrated in a way that benefited him, he stood to inherit a substantial fortune. As detectives probed these angles, Rick's calm demeanor began to falter. Rick became defensive, asserting that his financial issues were managed and that he had no motive to harm Edie. However, the police remained unconvinced. They were aware that Rick had a lot to lose if the marriage didn't proceed, and they suspected he might have been willing to take drastic measures to secure his future. Despite their suspicions, the police lacked sufficient evidence to charge Rick with the murder. Nevertheless, his shaky alibi and financial motives kept him under close scrutiny as the investigation continued. On the morning of January 24, 2013, Boynton Beach experienced one of its rare chilly days, with temperatures dropping into the 50s. During this rare cold spell, a significant breakthrough in Edie Palmer-Delamere's murder case emerged. Detective Karen Martins, who had been meticulously examining Edie's personal belongings, found a torn piece of handwritten note in Edie's bedside drawer. The note was crumpled and shoved to the back, suggesting someone had hastily tried to dispose of it. The note, though incomplete, caught Detective Martin's attention with its content. The handwriting was unmistakably Edie's, and the words hinted at a heated argument. The legible fragments included the names Rick betrayal will and an expletive. The fragments of the note suggested that Edie might have been altering her will or had uncovered something troubling about her fiancé, Rick Lasker. This discovery added a new layer to the investigation, reinforcing the suspicion that the motive for Edie's murder was financial. With this new evidence, the police reviewed Rick Lasker's financial records and found that he had recently made a substantial purchase, an expensive engagement ring, which he had claimed was a gift for Edie. The timing of the ring purchase was suspicious. Rick had bought the ring just days before Edie's death, despite his well-known financial difficulties. This raised questions: was Rick trying to placate Edie, or was the ring part of a broader scheme to manipulate her before her death? The detectives also decided to send the torn note to the lab for further analysis. The detectives aimed to recover any additional writing from the missing portion of the note to gain more insight into Edie's state of mind or her intentions regarding her will. They also requested a forensic examination of the handwriting to confirm that the note was genuinely written by Edie and not forged. With the discovery of the note and the suspicious ring purchase, Rick came under renewed and intense scrutiny. The police grew more convinced that Rick had something to hide and intensified their surveillance, hoping to catch any slip-up that might lead to a confession or uncover more concrete evidence. As the investigation progressed, they remained determined to piece together the puzzle, aware that time was running out to solve the case before it went cold. The torn note and the engagement ring were key in advancing the investigation, but the detectives knew they needed more to conclusively link Rick to Edie's murder. On the evening of January 30, 2013, as Boynton Beach residents braved the unseasonably cold weather, the police made a crucial breakthrough. After weeks of intense investigation, they gathered enough evidence to identify Edith Palmer-Delamere's murderer, her own daughter, Lila Palmer-Delamere. Lila, a 34-year-old burdened by her troubled past, had long lived in the shadow of her flamboyant and domineering mother. The investigation uncovered that Lila had harbored deep resentment toward Edie for years. Her jealousy and anger reached a breaking point when she discovered that her boyfriend, Jake DeCastro, was having an affair with Edie. This betrayal fueled a rage that ultimately led to Edie's murder. The police discovered that Lila had purchased a .38 caliber revolver just days before her mother's death. This, combined with forensic evidence and ballistic tests matching the bullets found at the crime scene to the revolver, provided a crucial link. Additionally, Lila's fingerprints were found on the ballpoint pen used to mutilate Edie's eyes, further revealing the intense hatred she harbored. On the night of Edie's murder, Lila confronted her mother about the affair. Feeling enraged and deeply betrayed, she shot Edie while she was in bed and then desecrated her body in a fit of blind fury. Lila's motive was unmistakably clear. Lila sought to punish her mother for the ultimate betrayal and remove the shadow Edie had cast over her entire life. The police arrested Lila at her modest apartment in West Palm Beach. When the officers arrived, she was calm and almost resigned, as if she had been expecting them. She offered no resistance and simply said, "You got me." Her reaction was emotionless, starkly contrasting with the brutality of her crime. Lila's arrest sent shockwaves through the local community. Edie's fiancé, Rick Lasker, initially a suspect, felt a mix of relief and devastation over the betrayal within the family. Friends and neighbors who had admired Edie for her vibrant personality were shocked to learn that her own daughter was responsible for the brutal killing. As Lila was led away in handcuffs, the case that had captivated Boynton Beach moved one step closer to resolution. For those who knew Edie, the tragedy of her murder at the hands of her own daughter left a deep scar on the community. Lila Palmer-Delamere's trial for the murder of her mother, Edith Palmer-Delamere, began on July 15, 2013, at the Palm Beach County Courthouse. The trial quickly became the focal point of Boynton Beach, with locals closely following the proceedings, eager for justice. The prosecution, led by Assistant State Attorney Jennifer Rietpanzer, was known for her tough, no-nonsense approach. Rietpanzer argued that Lila had meticulously planned her mother's murder out of deep-seated jealousy and anger. She presented evidence including the revolver Lila had purchased and the forensic proof linking her to the crime. Rietpanzer emphasized how Lila's long-standing resentment had built up over years, culminating in the tragic violence. Conversely, Lila's defense attorney, Paul Adams, a prominent public defender in South Florida, presented a different perspective. He argued that Lila's mental state had been severely affected by years of emotional abuse and manipulation by her mother, contributing to her actions. Adams argued that Lila had been driven to act out of uncontrollable rage rather than premeditated intent. He brought in expert witnesses to discuss Lila's history of depression and anxiety, which had intensified upon learning of her boyfriend's affair with Edie. The courtroom was filled with Edie's friends and former acquaintances who watched with a blend of sorrow and disbelief as the trial unfolded. Some had known Edie as a vibrant, albeit challenging, personality and found it hard to reconcile this with the brutal crime. On August 2, 2013, after only 6 hours of deliberation, the jury delivered a verdict of guilty for first-degree murder. The judge sentenced Lila to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the judge read out the sentence, Lila remained impassive, while her former boyfriend, Jake DeCastro, who had testified during the trial, appeared visibly relieved. The verdict provided a sense of closure to the case, but opinions were divided. Some in Boynton Beach felt that justice had been served, while others argued that Lila's life sentence was too severe, given her mental health struggles and the toxic nature of her relationship with her mother. For Edie's friends and family, the trial's outcome was bittersweet, marking the end of a tragic chapter but also highlighting the deep scars left by the crime. As life in Boynton Beach gradually returned to normal, the memory of Edith Palmer-Delamere's murder continued to cast a long shadow. Lila Palmer-Delamere began serving her life sentence at the Lowell Correctional Institution in Ocala, Florida, facing the reality of her actions and the consequences of her past. Reports indicated that Lila faced significant challenges adjusting to prison life, dealing with ongoing depression and isolation. Despite her legal team's attempts to appeal the sentence, her chances of release were slim. Meanwhile, Jake DeCastro, Lila's former boyfriend, sought to move on from the turmoil, focusing on rebuilding his own life and leaving behind the dramatic events that had once entangled him. Rick Lasker, too, made efforts to rebuild his life following the turmoil. After the case, he faced the aftermath of his failed relationship with Edie and the scrutiny surrounding it. He worked on regaining stability, both personally and professionally, but the scars of his involvement in the scandal remained. Despite his attempts to move forward, the events of the past continued to cast a long shadow over his life. Rick's financial struggles and the emotional toll from the trial led him to sell the opulent home he and Edie had intended to share. He relocated to a modest condo in Delray Beach, seeking solace in a quieter existence. Shunning the social circles he once frequented, Rick became increasingly reclusive, focusing on rebuilding his life away from the spotlight. Edie's death left a profound impact on her former friends and acquaintances. The vibrant social life that once characterized their gatherings had become a distant memory, overshadowed by the tragedy. Many of those who had been close to Edie found themselves reflecting on their own lives and relationships, striving to avoid the kinds of conflicts and dramatic ends that had marked Edie and Lila's story. A Truthsful Crime Case solvers. Interested in more real-life murder mysteries? Be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. Do you have any thoughts about this case, or have a case of your own you'd like us to investigate? Leave us a comment. Until then, stay safe.